The year was 1906. A thick fog enveloped the night, and darkness consumed every corner. At midnight, the somber toll of a bell echoed throughout the Winchester house. From a distance, an eerie melody began to drift through the air, disturbing the silence. This haunting tune wakes young Henry, who is sleeping beside his mother. Soon, his mother wakes up and finds out Henry is not in his place. Panic sets in. Her heart was pounding, and she hurried through the dimly lit corridors. Her footsteps echoed off the ancient walls. Around a corner, she caught sight of Henry at the end of a shadowy hallway. But something was terribly wrong. His head was grotesquely covered with a sack, and he stood ominously atop a staircase that led to nowhere. With trembling hands, she quickly removed the sack from his head, her breath catching in her throat. Henry's eyes were chillingly white, devoid of pupils, staring blankly towards the stair's dead end. In a hollow voice, he whispered, "He is coming for us," before collapsing into his mother's arms. The enigmatic Winchester house, notorious among the locals, is said to be cursed, a belief fiercely upheld by its mistress, Sarah Winchester. But who exactly is Sarah Winchester? Sarah, the widow of the famous gun manufacturer William Winchester, was plunged into despair by the untimely deaths of her husband and their only child, Annie. Left with a vast inheritance exceeding $20 million, she became consumed by the notion that she was haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester firearms. Driven by this dark conviction and the advice of a medium, she started constructing a sprawling mansion in San Jose, California. This colossal home, with over 100 rooms, remains under perpetual construction and is where she resides with her niece, Marion Marriott, and her great-nephew, Henry. In 1906, amidst growing concerns about her mental state, the Winchester Company employed Dr. Eric Price, a psychiatrist, to evaluate Sarah. The board was eager to deem her unfit to manage the company, so they offered Dr. Price a hefty sum to substantiate their claims. Dr. Price, mourning the recent loss of his wife Ruby, who had suffered from mental health issues, was grappling with his own demons, numbing his grief with laudanum. This opium-based drug blurred the edges of his reality with hallucinations. Upon his arrival at the mansion, Dr. Price was introduced to young Henry and his mother, Marion. As she led him to his quarters, Marion navigated him through the mansion's complicated layout. She cautioned him about the house's strict rules under Sarah's governance, pointedly advising against drinking before dinner, which was in line with her aunt's strict rules. Back in his room, Dr. Price was getting ready for dinner while taking doses of laudanum. As he adjusted his tie in front of a mirror, he noticed it kept turning unexpectedly. Frustrated, he adjusted it again, only to catch a chilling reflection of something, or someone, holding a shovel, seated quietly behind him. Startled, he spun around, but there was nothing there. Convinced he was seeing things due to the drug, he was shaken and bewildered. Dr. Price flung open the door, only to find the butler standing there as if waiting for him. Panicked, he asked the butler if he saw anyone else in the room. The butler replied that Mrs. Winchester would expect him at the dinner table at 8 p.m. Trying to compose himself, Dr. Price returned to his room to finish dressing, his mind racing with what he might have seen or imagined. At dinner, still unsettled, Dr. Price attempted to steady his nerves with a drink. He subtly gestured to the same butler, but his request was quietly denied. At the dinner table, Dr. Price engaged in conversation with Marion and her son Henry. He discovered that they had moved into Mrs. Winchester's mansion following the death of Henry's father. As their discussion deepened, Marion revealed that Sarah Winchester herself had selected Dr. Price as her evaluator. This news caught him off guard. Marion requested Dr. Price to assess her aunt fairly, insisting that Sarah was mentally stable. After a tense dinner with Mrs. Winchester, everyone retired for the night. Back in his room, Dr. Price found himself haunted by thoughts of his deceased wife, unable to find peace. In an attempt to soothe his mind, he took a few drops of opium, but still, he couldn't fall asleep. So he began wandering the maze-like corridors of the mansion, and his curiosity drew him to open various mysterious doors. As he explored, he heard soft whispers that made him alert and made him hide in a nearby room. Inside, he saw a blurry figure of a woman coming towards him. Scared, Dr. Price thought it was just a hallucination and ran outside into the cool night air. Outside, he notices the ongoing construction, and the workers are oblivious to the mansion's eerie happenings. Looking up, his heart skips a beat when he sees Henry on the roof, ominously walking with a sack over his head. Fearing the worst, Dr. Price shouts to catch his attention, but Henry seems unaware. Just as Henry nears the edge and falls, Dr. Price races up, catching him just in time as he stumbles, preventing a tragic fall. The next day, Dr. Price met with Sarah Winchester in her office to start evaluating her mental health. He asked why there were always people working on the house. Sarah explained that her husband William had been a famous gunmaker whose rifles had taken many lives. She believed the house was haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. To appease these spirits, she had rooms built to replicate the ones they had died in. She would apologize to these spirits within those rooms on behalf of the Winchester rifles, hoping to help them find peace and move on from their untimely deaths. She also seals the rooms with 13 nails to prevent the stronger spirits from wandering the rest of the mansion. During their talk, Sarah noticed the bullet Dr. Price always carries. He shared a painful memory. He was shot with a Winchester rifle during a tragic incident involving his wife, who had then turned the gun on and killed herself. Dr. Price had technically died for 3 minutes before being revived, and he blames himself for his wife's death. Sarah also cautioned him against using drugs while in her house, emphasizing it as a strict rule. Later that day, Dr. Price tried to find out if the workers had seen anything strange or ghostly, but no one would give him a clear answer. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Dr. Price became too restless to stay in his room. He wandered the halls, exploring the building. During his walk, he spied Sarah through a window, intensely drawing up plans for a new room. Curious, he watched her, trying to understand what she was planning. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared in the window, startling him so much that he ran back to his room. The following day, during their session, Sarah revealed to Dr. Price that the spirits became more powerful at midnight, which was when they communicated with her. She even showed him records of those killed by Winchester rifles, and this time, the spirit that crossed paths with Mrs. Winchester was strong and capable of destruction. That night, tragedy struck again as Henry, under a spirit's influence, tried to shoot Sarah with a rifle. Fortunately, Eric and Marion came in time. Shaken by the incident, Mrs. Winchester decided to confront the spirit herself. Meanwhile, Dr. Price, skeptical of the supernatural explanation, believed that Henry's actions were due to psychological trauma from his father's death and urgently needed hospital care. Despite Marion's agreement with Dr. Price, Sarah Winchester begged them to believe in the curse she was determined to break. As Sarah hurried to her library to find evidence that a vengeful and powerful spirit indeed haunted the newly constructed room, Dr. Price called the Winchester Company, seeking assistance from the board for Henry. Meanwhile, the strange butler, who earlier refused to serve drinks to Dr. Price, approached, claiming he was aware of the peculiar happenings within the mansion. He led Dr. Price to the mysterious staircase that led nowhere, the same place where Henry was found earlier. As they reached the staircase, the butler warned that the Winchesters would perish. When Dr. Price turned to confront him, the butler revealed himself as a ghost, sending a chill through Dr. Price and deepening the night's terror. Dr. Price took a few moments to collect himself before rushing to find Sarah Winchester to share the chilling encounter. Then they combed through the old records and identified the ghost as Benjamin Block, a Confederate soldier who lost his two brothers to Winchester rifles during the Civil War. Devastated and vengeful, Benjamin had stormed a Winchester office 20 years ago, tragically killing 15 employees before being fatally shot by the police. Sarah had recreated the very room where Benjamin died in the mansion, inadvertently giving his spirit a pathway to roam the earthly realm and eventually move on from the earthly pain. It was Benjamin's spirit that had been possessing Henry. Dr. Price realized how wrong he was that he could see ghosts. This is because he was dead for 3 minutes after getting shot by a Winchester rifle. Upon knowing this, they rushed to the newly constructed room where Ben was killed. Suddenly, an earthquake rocked the mansion amidst the hauntings, causing devastation and loss of life among the workers. In the turmoil, Benjamin's spirit violently attacked Sarah, throwing her against the walls. The chaos separated her from Dr. Price, and a possessed Henry broke free from his room amidst the pandemonium. Marion is worried and scared. She summons all her courage and embarks on a relentless pursuit to find Henry. As Dr. Price made his way back to the room where Ben was shot, he encountered several spirits, one of whom was his late wife, Ruby. This meeting helped him realize that Ruby, who could see and hear ghosts, was wrongly diagnosed as delusional by him. He recalled the tragic night of her death. In a desperate struggle, he tried to prevent her from harming herself with a rifle, but in the chaos, she accidentally shot him before taking her own life. Ruby's spirit appeared to Dr. Price, urging him to forgive himself so she could find peace. Her words lifted a weight from his shoulders and inspired him to help Sarah. Reunited with Sarah, they managed to corner Ben in the haunted room. Amidst a tense standoff, where Ben's ghost had cornered Marion and Henry, Dr. Price discovered that Ben feared the very bullet that had once struck Dr. Price. The bullet that had briefly claimed his life, allowing him to see spirits. Using this bullet, Dr. Price loaded it into the rifle Ben had used in his rampage and successfully banished his spirit. This act saved Henry and Marion, and the rest of the spirits retreated back to their rooms. After this storm is over, Eric writes a letter to the Winchester Company Board, declaring Sarah Winchester sane and affirming her ability to remain in charge of the company. Sarah then announces her plans to build additional rooms to assist more spirits. This incredible story is based on true events that took place in San Jose, California. 9 months after the death of Mrs. Winchester in 1922, the construction finally stopped and the house became a top tourist attraction. This was the spine-chilling take of Winchester Mansion. For more captivating true thrillers like this, make sure to subscribe to Plotline.